How to repair or replace an existing pickup from an acoustic guitar. This job should be really straightforward, but I'm going to use this opportunity to answer some questions and also deal with some other issues that come up with acoustic pickups and preamps. And the pickup I'll be replacing is the one out of this James Nelligan guitar, and it's a Fishman Isys one. And the issues with it is the tuner no longer works and the battery never fit right, so it causes vibrations. And I'm replacing like with like because I've had several requests on previous videos to do this. And if your preamp does go or your pickup goes, quite often you don't have any choice but to replace the whole thing. And I've never found a preamp you couldn't find a replacement for with a simple Google, eBay or Amazon search. And of course, if you replace like with like, there shouldn't be any new holes to cut or drill. But you might have noticed that this preamp is slightly different to the original, but that's just an update, so hopefully it won't make any difference to the finished job. Right, let's take a look at the preamp system outside the guitar. And to do this, we'll use the new one, and then you can have a good idea of how it connects up and how it fits inside the guitar. Let's unbag the preamp then, so we can take a good look at it. And I'll speed this bit up by 3 times so it doesn't get too boring. And straight away you can see this particular system is only made up of 2 parts. And the pickup itself is actually attached to the preamp and it's hardwired, which I don't particularly like, but that's the way it is. You will find on a lot of preamps that the pickup isn't actually hardwired to the preamp and it plugs in, which I quite like. To illustrate that, here's an EQ505. And this is a fairly common preamp you get on quite a lot of guitars. Hopefully you'll have noticed by what I've talked about so far that everything goes back to the preamp. If you have to replace the jack plug socket, you have to unplug it from the preamp. If you have to replace a piezo pickup, you have to go back to the preamp. If you have to replace the battery housing, it goes back to the preamp. So whatever job you need to do to the guitar electrics, you have to slide the preamp out so you can see the back of it. You can see now why I prefer the preamps that everything plugs into, because if you need to replace anything, it's far easier just to unplug the old one and plug a new one in. And in this particular case, it means I'm going to have to replace the pickup even though it's working fine, because the new pickup is hardwired to the preamp. And this means I'm going to have to remove all the strings and the saddle, which I wouldn't have needed to do otherwise. If there was some sort of extenuating circumstances, you could always cut the wire to the existing pickup and cut the wire to the new pickup and solder the joints together so that you don't have to remove the pickup. But this would be a very last resort, and I'd avoid it if you possibly could. Right, before I even start the job, I'm going to check that the new pickup and preamp are working, so let's do that now. To check the preamp's working, I'm going to plug it all in and put a battery in. And the first test is that the light comes on and it's actually being powered up. And the second test will be to plug it into something and then rub my nail against the pickup and see if any sound comes through. As far as I could go with that test, everything seems to be working fine. But there's one last thing I just want to check before I put it in, and that's the fit of the battery. As I said at the beginning of this video, one of the problems with the existing preamp was the fact that the battery was loose in the housing, so it would vibrate. So I'll just do a quick comparison between the old one and the new one to see if the batteries fit better in the new one. Unfortunately, this battery isn't the perfect one to do the test with because it's slightly smaller than a regular battery, being rechargeable. But it demonstrates that they're about the same. They haven't actually sorted this problem out. But hopefully, because it's a newer, stronger spring at the end of the battery housing, it'll hold the battery more tightly into place. Right, let's start replacing the old components with the new ones. And because I'm going to have to replace the pickup, the first thing I'll do is remove the strings, or at least get them out of the way. I'll speed this part of the video up so it isn't too boring. And what I'm doing here is just loosening the strings right off. And I want to loosen them far enough that I can get the pegs out and get the saddle out without actually having to remove the strings. You'll notice, because I knew I was going to be doing this job, I didn't cut the strings back in the first place. I've left them long so I can take them off and put them back on if I have to. So once I've loosened them off, what I think is far enough, I'll peg them into place using a capo. Right, once the strings are loose enough and held back in place, I'll remove the pegs. But before I do that, I'll stick a strip of sellotape onto the body of the guitar, so I can take the pegs out and put them back in the same order. Sometimes the holes and the pegs are different sizes, so it can be quite important that the same peg goes back into the same hole. Once the pegs are removed, I can remove the strings and get them out of the way. And that way I can remove the saddle. And this gives me access to the pickup, so I'll be ready when I want to replace it. On this particular guitar, I've got a muffler or feedback suppressor over the hole, and I'll remove this too because I'll need to be able to put my hand inside the hole to access the back of the pickup. The next job is to remove the preamp, and we do this by just taking the 4 screws out of the corners. I've speeded this bit up again so it doesn't get too boring to watch. Once the screws have been removed, it should slide out quite easily. I tend to put my hand inside the guitar and push it from the back. Be careful when you're pushing it or pulling it out, because the wires will still be connected at the back. Another thing to take note of is the fact that there's a back plate there, and you'll have to remove this now and then put it back into place when you put the new preamp in. Now I'll unplug all the wires from the back of the preamp, and you'll notice there's still one wire in place, and that's the wire to the pickup. So I'll gently pull at the back of the pickup and tease the pickup back through the hole. Even though this pickup was still working, it's just as well I'm replacing it because it's pretty badly worn. Next, I need to remove the battery compartment and the output socket, and this is done the same way as we did with the preamp. I'll just remove the 4 screws from the corners. Again, I'm speeding this bit up so it doesn't get too boring. The last screw was really hard to get out. It had been screwed in at quite a sharp angle. I don't know if this was done at the factory or if somebody's done some work on this guitar in the past. Before I start to remove the battery compartment, I'm going to tie some string to the plugs at the other end where it was connected to the preamp. The knot doesn't have to be anything spectacular, it only has to be there for a few seconds. But on the other hand, you don't want it coming undone halfway through the guitar. Now, when you remove the battery compartment and all the wiring, theoretically the string should follow on behind. I've put a loop in the string and attached it to a screwdriver so I don't pull it too far. And what we do with this string is we tie it onto the new plugs and just pull it back the other way, and this way it's threaded through the guitar quite easily without messing about. However, if you don't use this method, it's not the end of the world, because it's easy enough to thread the wire through by putting your hand inside the sound hole. It's just I find this way quicker and easier. Strangely, on this guitar they've put a backplate on the preamp, but they haven't put one on the output socket and battery holder, which is where I would have thought it would have needed more. Right, now we can start reversing the whole process and putting the guitar back together, and I'll start by screwing the battery compartment back into place. If you find you've got a screw that comes out at an angle, just let it go back in at the same angle. If you try to correct it, you can cause yourself more problems. Once we've put the new battery compartment into place, we can go around the guitar and put the new preamp into place. But before we do that, we need to make sure the wires coming from the battery housing are going through the backing plate, and also the wire for the pickup. Then we need to put the backing plate back inside the guitar with the flat side facing towards the hole. Once you're sure all the wires are going through the back plate correctly, we need to connect the preamp up. And to do this, we need to plug in the two sets of wires that are coming from the battery housing. Now you can put the preamp back into the preamp hole and screw it into place, but obviously it helps if you put it in the right way round. Whilst you're screwing the preamp back into place, you need to hold the back plate against the back of the guitar and make sure the screws are going through the provided holes. And it's surprisingly easy because the backing plate fits quite tightly around the back of the preamp, so it all lines up quite well. Once you're happy that the preamp is fitted correctly, we can move on to fitting the pickup. However, before we do that, there's something we need to check. This also gives me the opportunity to respond to a question I get asked quite often in the comments. And that's from people who have a guitar where, through the pickup, one or two of the strings are either far too loud or far too quiet. And the most common cause for this issue is that the surface above the pickup or below the pickup isn't completely flat. The pickup needs to be compressed between the saddle and the bridge completely uniformly. So if there's any dirt in the slot, this will cause problems, and also if the base of the saddle is uneven. So if you have an uneven saddle, you might need to sand down the bottom of it until it's completely flat. However, you have to be very careful how much material you sand off the base of the saddle, because anything you take off the saddle affects the action of the guitar. The most common cause of this issue I see is just dirt from the factory in the slot, or just the natural shedding of the wood or splinters. So before you put the pickup back in the slot, you need to make sure it's completely clean. And you can do this with anything as long as it's not going to damage the wood. Here I'm using a rip tie, which I've cut at 90 degrees so I can drag it along the bottom of the slot. I also sometimes use a file which has got a flat bottom, but obviously I'm not using it as a file, I'm just lightly brushing the bottom of the slot so I can feel for any impurities. And then I'll finish up with a small brush. If you look at the state of the pickup I've removed from this guitar, you can see it's worn through in places. So where that's worn through, you wouldn't be able to hear anything being picked up. So it wouldn't be long before the strings started going quiet. and this is just through wear and tear. If you do have a quiet string or quiet strings, there are obviously easier solutions. For example, a slither of paper directly underneath the saddle where the string is quiet, or sellotape. Obviously, this isn't the professional solution or the recommended solution, but it does work if you're desperate. Right, I know the slot's clean now, so let's fit the pickup on this guitar. And because the hole is very small, and I've got to feed the new pickup from the back, what I do is push the old pickup from the top. And that way I can feel it coming through into the guitar, and it helps me locate the hole so I can then follow it with the new pickup when I pull it out. As a side note, this pickup obviously has to come from inside the guitar because it's attached to the preamp. However, some of the pickups that plug into the preamp have to come from the top, and this is why they plug into the preamp. And the reason they have to come from the top is they can't be bent and they have a 90-degree joint in them. Right, back to our project. And once we've got the pickup sticking out, we can then bend it down so it fits flat inside the slot, right to the end of the slot. Once you've got the pickup sitting flat in the slot and going completely to the end, you can put the saddle on top of it, and hopefully it'll stay in place. But sometimes it might try to push its way out, in which case you'll have to hold it there for a minute or put a bit of tape on until you get the first couple of strings on, which will hold it down properly. And basically that's the job done. We just have to put the strings back on now and tune the guitar up, and we can test it. Those of you who are more observant will notice I put different pegs back on the guitar than I took off, but I'll explain this in a different video. Once you've got the strings back in place, we can remove the capo, and obviously we've got to do this before we tune the guitar. Right, I'll tune the guitar up now. No matter how many times you do a job like this, you're always a little bit nervous that the job's gone right. And the first two good bits of news is, one, that the preamp has come on, and two, it's tuning the guitar really nicely. This is going really well, and the guitar seems to have tuned up nicely. Before I put the feedback suppressor back in place, I need to mention a job I've done off camera. And I did it off camera because it's inside the guitar and it's very hard to film. And that is, the wires should be clipped into place to stop them rattling round and to keep them from being on view through the hole. But because this is a replacement, the clip's already in place in the guitar, so there's no need to replace that. So I've just pushed the wires into that clip to hold them into place. Now I've done that final job, I'll put the feedback suppressor back over the hole, and then I can test the guitar. And the first test I'll do is very clinical, and I'll just test each string with an oscilloscope, and then I can tell if any of them are lacking in signal. As it is naturally with an acoustic guitar, the signal gets stronger as you go towards the bass, and you can see this is reflected in my test, which means the test is fine. So that's done and dusted. I'll just do one final test, and I'll play the guitar through my mixing desk with a more or less clean channel with a little bit of reverb, just to see how it sounds. Firstly, here's just the open strings. Now, Here's some simple chords. Here's an excerpt from a fingerpicking tune. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please like and subscribe. And if you're looking for guitar lessons, just go over to my YouTube channel where I've got playlists of full guitar courses. And you can find more guitar courses at www.ebooks4guitar.com, and they're all completely free to view online. Thank you very much for watching.